Morning.
Great to see you all. I want to thank the chapel worship team for inviting me this morning. It's actually been nearly 2 years since I've been in this chapel because of the combination of COVID semesters, remote learning, and my own research, and then parental leave. So it's a really significant moment to finally be back here in person. And I'm deeply, deeply appreciative of that. So enter into my joy to be back in community with me. I also wanted to appreciate the work of the students who've been planning events to process the effects of the pandemic on the STH community. I noted that one of these events is taking place this afternoon, and I took this as an opportunity to reflect on how the experience of the last 2 years shapes our rituals of Advent this season. So, I don't know about you all, but I have been plagued with feelings of confinement. First, there are the obvious reasons that for nearly a year we went through cycles of total quarantine and soft reopening, and there hasn't been a single moment since where we have been released, so to speak. As a parent of young kids, I have been caught between the conflicting messages of "it probably won't happen" and "but it could," where "it" is a nightmare scenario. And yet I feel for those for whom deep loneliness has been their primary experience, where sliding towards something like normal life has been deeply hoped for, but also jarring and exhausting. These physical confinements, though, are only part of the story. Feeling trapped and limited by COVID has thrown into relief other types of confinements that both preceded and continue past the pandemic. I feel confined by our culture of collective othering, snapped judgments, one-upmanship, scapegoating, and binary thinking. I feel confined by a politics of obfuscation and deception that has erected walls of fear and cynicism between members of my own family. I have felt at times confined by the expectations of excellence in the university, those standards that both call us to our best selves and can pull us into mental prisons of self-doubt. I feel constricted by hierarchies of race, class, gender, and sexuality when we wield identities like weapons rather than employ them in the service of celebrating the beautiful diversity of humanity. I feel trapped in particular by the inheritance of white supremacy, a pernicious weed that coils in and through the world order such that it seems we can never pull it out without destroying the entire garden. I feel constricted by the imperative to accumulate capital that animates all our institutions, and I feel trapped by what we've done to this exquisite earthly home in our need to have more and make more. And lately, in the midst of all of this, even the question of faith feels like a trap. I cannot believe, and I can't not believe. In the prologue of the Advent story, we can feel a similar sense of confinement in early Common Era Judea. We are reminded in the first part of Luke 3 that our protagonists are a people colonized by the Roman Empire. In this empire, as in its modern analogs, there are global and there are local players. Judea's own King Herod is a colonial despot, a Jew who has aligned with foreign powers out of self-preservation or greed, a dynamic known as extroversion by scholars of imperialism today. Then, as today, the empire controls through division and chaos, threat and appeal, and living with the empire becomes an experience of alienation from self and other. In the next movement, the figure of John emerges, calling back to an ancient prophecy. The words of liberation are big, but also opaque. Every valley shall be filled, every mountain made low. Which valley? Which mountains? The words are powerful and subversive, but still only suggestive. John's hearers would be forgiven for reading them as a direct challenge to their oppressors, but nothing is explicitly named or promised, just salvation in some form. For us today, the words set a scene of bubbling resentment and frustration, multiplied rumors, and a surplus of meanings, a system on the edge of a knife. In a later movement, we read an exchange between the religious leader Nicodemus and a second prophetic figure, Jesus. They meet at night, and the subtext suggests a certain question is on Nicodemus's mind. Are you the one who is going to get us out of this? What he says out loud is, we know you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do apart from the presence of God. Remember that in the prior chapter, Jesus had acted in two ways, turning water into wine at a wedding and violently disrupting the temple economy, even promising to rebuild the temple when it was destroyed. So Nicodemus asks, is it you? And Jesus responds with one of the most familiar but honestly most obtuse passages of the Gospels. The term born again is now so global and so common. I've written papers on what it means to identify as such in an African context, that it is easy to lose a sense of how honestly bizarre Jesus' response is. The more times I read these verses, the less I feel I understand them. As I have read them this year, however, I have caught a new meaning, especially toward the end. The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. In the past, I had always read this as, the Holy Spirit is like the wind that blows where it chooses. But here, literally, it says everyone who is born of the Spirit is like the wind, free, unfettered, coming from somewhere else and going somewhere else, beyond this plane of matter and flesh. The words play on the mystery of birth and mortality and the longings inside of each of us for the deepest kind of liberation. Not just freedom from a particular confinement, but freedom from the weight of earthly things. Still, it's not really an answer for the moment. Jesus seems to be promising both less and more than Nicodemus was hoping for. As I have sought liberation in this time, I have also found both more and less than I was hoping for. So much of what keeps us confined seems inevitable, impervious to transformation. Political corruption, ravenous capitalism, social fracturing, climate change, and a new strain of COVID just discovered last week. Yet when the pandemic sent us home, I also found so many unexpected new freedoms. Long walks in the woods with my kids every morning, sitting down on the rug and really playing together. No more traffic jams or running for the train, less need to pretend to be superhuman to each other. I refocused on my life and learned again that each life is full of its own small liberations, those moments that even the shadow of death cannot touch. As many of you know, I had a baby this year, our third. From one perspective, this was a crazy thing to do. I already felt regularly overwhelmed by all it takes to be a parent and a professional. But having another child, Alice, became a way to fully embrace and engage with my life, regardless of what was happening around it. Her birth this summer was a small liberation for me. I think this might be some of what Jesus is getting at with Nicodemus. We are born into the Spirit in such moments, passing through our earthly oppressions like the wind. During Advent, we remember how the grandest story converges on the birth of a child, a spirit unfettered and untouchable by the most brutal of empires. We will ever long for big liberations in the here and now, and they are worth fighting for. But in the present, right now, we are never truly bound if we are reborn each day in the Spirit, finding our small liberations. My hope and prayer for each of you is to find those today.
Amen.